Hello YouTube. Bugs. Tamriel's full of them, both programming bugs and actual bugs and insects. Now, today, after quite a few unironic requests in the comments, I'll be taking a look at Tamriel's most interesting bugs and insects, from the terrifying Chaurus and assassin beetles to the small and adorable Thunderbug. Oh, and by the way, some of these aren't strictly insects, like for the biologists out there, keep your hands off your keyboards please. Like, I'll be covering spiders as well. While those are technically not insects, I think they still pretty well fit into this video's theme and would make it more complete. So before you comment, but Zork, that's not an insect. I know. Oh, and by the way, one last thing before we begin. I got a lot of help for this video from Tarpenpet, a member of the Elder Scrolls community who is very knowledgeable on the bugs and insects of Tamriel and the creatures of the Elder Scrolls universe as a whole. He's an avid UESP contributor and he has done his fair share in documenting Tamriel's lore. And this video would not be as complete without his help, so I left a link to his YouTube channel in the description so you can give him some love. Anyway, without any further ado, let's roll the intro and get into this video. So, bugs and insects. Tamriel has a lot of them, so I'll limit this video to some of the more interesting and unique ones. Trust me, it'll be long enough as it is. And I'll be sure to add some timestamps in case you want to know something about a specific creature. Now, while Tamriel has creatures like bees, mosquitoes, worms, termites, cockroaches, locusts and ants, those are also present in our own universe, and the versions that we find on Tamriel are more or less identical to those of our own world. So it isn't all that interesting to talk about those kind of creatures, but if you want to learn about those creatures, it's probably honestly better to just open a biology textbook rather than watch an Elder Scrolls lore video made by a dumbass behind a laptop. Now, the specific creatures that I'd like to talk about in this video are creatures that we either don't find in our own universe, or creatures which we do find in our own universe but have a funny or terrifying twist on Tamriel. To illustrate what I mean, let's talk about the first bug on this list, giant wasps. While yes, our universe has plenty of wasps, as anyone trying to eat anything outside in the summer can tell you, they aren't necessarily the size of a fully grown human. If they were, I would lock myself inside my apartment for the entirety of the summer. Fortunately, wasps that large only appear on Tamriel, and they are terrifying. They have two sets of wings, multifaceted eyes, and they have quite a hard carapace. They are highly territorial creatures, mostly living in Tamriel's jungles and swamps, and they can make immensely big nests to house their colonies in, which are led by a queen. They are quite deadly creatures to travelers and ordinary people, as they have a deadly sting and will, when threatened, even use their own young in combat, as they carry their eggs with them, and they can force these eggs to hatch during combat in order to fight alongside the parent. Now, the giant wasp has an even more terrifying and bigger cousin on Tamriel called the Parapton, or at least that's the name given to them by unofficial material, as while they do appear in official sources, they're never named beyond being an even bigger kind of wasp. These wasps are the size of essentially large horses. They live in Morrowind's plains, mountains and ashlands, just like a lot of other large terrifying insects in this video, and House Dress of Morrowind has managed to tame some of these immensely big wasps and uses them as flying mounts. According to some unofficial material by an ex-writer, the Parapton colonies also have queens, and said queen is much bigger than the regular Paraptons, and the queen also determines, during an audience with the Dunmer of House Dress, whether or not one of her children will be sent out to become tamed and then used as a mount. However, that last bit again is unlicensed and unofficial material, so keep that in mind, but I do think it fits neatly into the lore that we already have, with House Dress using these massive wasps as flying mounts in official material. Now, additionally, we also got the so-called Kotugava, which aren't gigantic wasps, but rather are gigantic mosquitos. There's very little lore on these creatures from what I can tell, other than that they exist, and that they have a very painful bite, and we know that the females of the species can become brood mothers, which can give birth to several smaller, younger Kotugava. Other than that, we don't know anything, unfortunately. Now, next up, let's talk about probably one of the most well-known insects of Tamriel. Let's talk about the Silt Strider, probably one of Tamriel's most recognizable insects. They are large insects with 6 long legs that look absolutely terrifying if you don't know what they are. No, really. While they are relatively common in Morrowind, which is where they are even used as transportation by the people of Morrowind, people from outside Morrowind in the lore are really scared of these creatures and sometimes don't even dare to ride on them, even though in Morrowind they are basically one of the easiest and most accessible forms of transportation. Fortunately for the people outside of Morrowind, these creatures, despite looking absolutely terrifying, are quite calm and friendly creatures and don't mean the people of Tamriel any harm. And as such they have become a bit of a fan favorite creature, especially for Morrowind players. Even the smallest of Silt Striders, from the tip of their legs to the tops of their carapaces, are at least 6 meters tall, or about 20 feet, with a lot of them growing even taller. The creatures use their long legs to move gracefully across the ash-covered landscapes of Vvardenfell and some parts of Morrowind's mainland. They have thick, durable carapaces, and while moving across the ash landscape, they are far faster than horses, since the horses usually get stuck in the ash. When they are used as beasts of transportation, or Vvardenfell taxis as the community sometimes calls them, a section of their sturdy carapace is carved out to form a seating area, being able to house several travelers. To control the Silt Strider, a driver uses strange and somewhat brutal sounding techniques, as the driver manipulates the Silt Strider's organs with a series of hooks. It really sounds kinda painful for the creature, but it seems like the Silt Striders don't really mind it, although as you'll see further up in this video when we talk about the Nix Ox, this might not be as innocent of a process as we think, but from what we know, the Silt Striders don't really seem to mind. Now, despite their massive sizes, these creatures are highly adaptable to the hostile environments of Morrowind, with their strong shells offering protection against ash storms and predators, and as such very few creatures are willing to challenge a Silt Strider in the wild, knowing that their tough carapaces make them nearly impossible to prey on. If threatened, however, they can become quite dangerous and unpredictable, but that does seem to be quite rare. The Silt Striders start their lives as small larvae. The Silt Strider larvae eventually cocoon themselves before emerging into their final form, after which they grow into their towering adult form. Beyond that, we don't really know much about their life cycle, except that their mating behavior is said to be quite awkward, with clumsy flailing movements that can be dangerous for bystanders. And they may have a sort of in-between form between their larval form and their final form, which is called the Silt Hopper, essentially a small Silt Strider that are used as pack animals in Morrowind. We don't exactly know whether or not these creatures are or are not young Silt Striders. As was pointed out to me, they may simply be a miniature subspecies of Silt Strider instead of a young variant. So while they may represent a stage in a not yet fully grown Silt Strider's life, they may also be their own smaller subspecies. Me personally, I think it's more likely that they are young Silt Striders, somewhere between larva and their final form. That's not really based on anything, but that's the kind of vibe that they give off to me, but that comes from me, a guy whose speculations have often been wrong in the past, so take that with a grain of salt. Now, even though the Silt Striders can survive even the hardest conditions in Vvardenfell, they also have their limits. While immune to ash storms, they are quite vulnerable to lava, and after the eruption of the Red Mountain, which caused the Red Year in Morrowind, many of them got killed by the eruption, and Vvardenfell likely became unlivable for them as their natural environment radically changed, and their food sources likely dwindled and dwindled even further. By the 4th era, during the time of Skyrim, only a few Silt Striders remain. Their numbers are so low now that they are nearly extinct, leaving behind only a distant memory of the time when they roamed Vvardenfell in abundance. However, there is some hope for them, as dialogue in Skyrim does suggest that in the lore there are far more of them left than we actually see in the games. So while they may never be as abundant as they were in the 3rd era ever again, there's still hope for them as a species. Alright, next up, the Chaurus, a creature many veteran Skyrim players are likely familiar with. The Chaurus is a large predatory arthropod that lives in the darkest caves of Skyrim and the border regions of the province. These creatures are quite strong and annoying in combat. They are known to players and the very few people on Tamriel who have encountered them for their aggressive nature and quite effective combat abilities, including the production of a potent poison which they can shoot at their enemies from a distance. In addition to these poisonous ranged attacks, Chaurus also possess razor-sharp teeth, making them highly dangerous in close quarters combat as well. Now, we don't know all that much about the origins of the Chaurus, however some have speculated that they might be the result of ancient snow elf experiments to create war beasts. This theory kind of aligns with the fact that the Chaurus have been domesticated by the Falmer, the descendants of the snow elves who keep the creatures in pens to breed them for defense and to use the creatures' chitin to craft durable armor. Now, beyond their utility for the Falmer, the Chaurus also strangely have found a place into Nordic cuisine, with their meat being described as a rare delicacy to some, but considering how dangerous these creatures are and the places that we find them in, I doubt that many Nords would actually know what they taste like, save for adventurers who are forced to eat them when they are stuck in caves, or people rich enough to have mercenaries sent into caves to fetch Chaurus meat, because while the Falmer have domesticated them, it doesn't seem like any other race had managed to do so, or perhaps they just never tried. Now, one of the most interesting things about the Chaurus is their life cycle, as its life cycle is kinda weird and has some strange aspects to it. Because they begin their lives as eggs, from which they hatch into a small young hatchling Chaurus. They then grow into adult creatures, the adult Chauruses that we find in the caves of Skyrim, but then, upon their death, their story isn't over. You see, the corpse of a dead Chaurus becomes a cocoon of sorts, and inside that cocoon grows the next stage in their life cycle. Because from within the decaying shell of the dead creature, a new form known as the Chaurus Hunter emerges, which is a flying and more dangerous version of the Chaurus and is seemingly their ultimate form. Now, something interesting to note here is that we don't know when exactly the Chaurus lay their eggs. Many believe that the eggs, which are very valuable for alchemists by the way, are produced before the Chaurus dies the first time and enters its cocoon stage, meaning that the reproductive part of their life cycle all takes place before their ultimate hunter form comes into the world. Some of those same people have speculated that the Chaurus Hunter is in fact a sort of undead creature, but I don't know about that. Although I do think it's likely that their reproduction takes place during the regular Chaurus stage and not during the Hunter stage, but we don't exactly know. But that is about all that we do know about the Chaurus, so next up let's talk about the cockroach. There really isn't much to say about this disgusting little creature, and even uttering its name makes me afraid to see them in my apartment at some point. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But we do know that other than them being pretty similar to the cockroaches in our world, we do have some Tamriel specific variants that are worth a mention. Specifically, Tamriel has the desert dwelling sand roach, and you've got the so-called elevin roaches, which are bred actively in the Somerset Isles for their carapaces, which are valuable ingredients for grey paint. And their meat is regarded as a bit of a snack to some Altmer. Pretty cool, right? Alright, next up let's talk about a collection of flying small insects, which are all a bit similar but have a lot of interesting lore to them nonetheless. First up, the torch bug. Now, the torch bug are very small, glowing nocturnal beetles, very reminiscent of fireflies from our own universe. They live all across Tamriel near plants and flowers, and across Tamriel you've got many different variants and subspecies. And they also have cultural significances to many cultures around Tamriel. For example, the red crimson torch bug, which is commonly found in southern Tamriel, is believed to bless moon sugar production in elsewhere, while the Bosmer believe that the regular yellow torch bug brings good fortune. Meanwhile, the purple torchbug is believed to be associated with Sheogorath's influence in a place. It's likely that we get even more torchbug variants in the future, but we already have some very interesting subspecies for the creature nonetheless. For example, we've got the so-called Reeker, which is said to be a bug similar to the torchbug, except instead of emitting light, it emits an absolutely foul stench, earning it the name Reeker. Now, we also got the Blissbug, which are torchbug-like creatures from the Shivering Isles, but they still count for this video, as they often appear in places on Tamriel where Sheogorath's influence is strong, much like the purple torchbug is believed to be by the people of Tamriel. Now, we've also got the Dewbug, which looks and almost acts exactly the same way as regular torchbugs, except they have some very interesting magical properties. Because the Bosmer can use Dewbugs to create elemental lurcher guardians, which can be used to protect their homes. Their natural behavior is much like torchbugs, but that magical elemental property sets them apart, as far as we know, the regular torchbugs don't have the ability to be transformed into elemental nurture guardians. Now, finally, for the glowing insects, we've got candleflies. They are far smaller than the torchbugs and are basically just glowing miniature flies. We don't really know anything about them, although we do know that Breton families catch them and put them in baskets and then release them as a swarm during parties to create a small light spectacle. Pretty cool. Also, talking about small flying insects, bees. Bees themselves aren't really anything special, but we do have one type of bee on Tamriel which is unique and special, or at least we used to have them. I'm talking about the Isgareth bees, which are now extinct, and the reason as to why they are extinct is pretty amazing, as in the first and early second era, the Altmer started believing that their honey granted immortality if you consumed enough of it. So the Altmer basically hunted down every one of them to extinction for their honey, which is kinda sad. Some Altmer conspiracy theorists, however, still believe that they exist and that the highest nobles of the Somerset Isles still have private hives of Isgaret bees, but that seems to be just a conspiracy theory. Now, one small flying insect that we know literally almost nothing about is the so-called whirlyfly, which is a small fly apparently living in Valenwood, and the Bosmer seem to dislike them, and some Bosmer use the curse, "May your ears be stuffed with whirlyfly larvae," meaning that it's possible that these creatures put their young inside other organisms' small warm openings, but other than that, we don't know anything about them, unfortunately. The same actually goes for flesh flies, small red insects about the size of a grain of sand. We don't know much about them other than that they live in all kind of places across Tamriel and that they feast on the flesh of mortals, except for Argonians for some reason. Argonians are immune to them, which is weird. We also have the Flipback, another creature that we know very little about, which lives in Valenwood and are a bit of a pest, but other than that, no real information other than one unofficial source which describes them as having a false eye on their thorax and describes them as glowing in the dark. Alright, now the final small flying insect that I want to give a mention is the dragonfly, or dartwings, or more commonly known as the Dova fly as they're called on Tamriel. Of course, Dova, after dragon. They don't really differ all too much from the real world versions of dragonflies, but the name change does make it interesting. Now there is one more interesting bit about Dova flies, and that is that they are apparently able to be domesticated, as in if you raise them from their larval form, they can follow you around and be loyal companions, or excellent insect eaters to get rid of insects inside your house, except for this one of course, the Dova fly. Their ability to get rid of insects in a house is actually one of the reasons why many Redguards are quite fond of them, and they are apparently a staple in many Redguards' homes. Alright, now next up we're talking about another extinct type of bug, the Nechorble, which was a very large insect with a rock-like carapace, which is said to have been one of the scourges of ancient Vardenfell, although some claim that they never truly existed and were made up by the Tribunal Temple. Now, we really don't know anything about these creatures, except that they were all slain by the Dunmer at some point, and that the final one was personally slain by the living god Vivek, with statues commemorating the event of the slaying of the last Nechorble scattered around Morrowind. Alright, now a creature that we definitely know did exist, and maybe still exists in the 4th era, probably still exists in the 4th era, unfortunately, is the Hoarvor. The Hoarvor is a creature that I personally find pretty disgusting, and that's why I said they probably still exist, because I kinda hope that they don't, because they're disgusting. They're basically a gigantic variant of the common tick that we have in our own universe, you know, the ones that can give you Lyme disease. Those creatures. Now, these creatures are notorious for their blood-drinking tendencies. Hoarvors thrive in damp environments such as swamps and areas near rivers where they lurk in search of prey. While they don't typically attack healthy wild creatures, they are opportunistic feeders. They prefer to target the sleeping, injured, dead or dying, and when they gather in large numbers they can overpower large creatures as a pack. The wounds inflicted by Hoarvors are pretty dangerous because when feeding they latch onto arteries, making the removal of the creature a delicate and really dangerous process. If not done carefully, the host could bleed out rapidly, as the Hoarvor's bite causes deep wounds that are really difficult to treat. With them being strongly attracted by the scent of blood, Hoarvors can become a serious problem if they are not dealt with quickly. A single dead body left out too long on the streets, or even an unattended pet or livestock creature that is sleeping somewhere, can easily draw an infestation of these disgusting creatures. And once these parasites settle in, they are notoriously difficult to eradicate. However, frost salts are known to deter them from a house, and a mist of viper bite leaves and hazemos can also be an effective repellent according to the lore. Now, despite their grotesque nature, Hoarvors are surprisingly edible and are even considered quite tasty by some. The Bosmer, for instance, have been known to keep them as pets and livestock for food and crafting parts, as their skin can be used in crafting quite a lot of different things, especially in Bosmery culture. So they are quite useful, but I'm a bit biased and I kinda hope that we will never see them again, because they are particularly disgusting and they might be my least favorite insect on this list. I don't know why, I just don't like them. You might like them, let me know in the comments if you do, but I don't. Alright, next up let's talk about some beetles. No, not those. The bugs. Obviously. Okay, what was I thinking? Alright, let's just start with the smallest and most harmless unique beetle of Tamriel, the Shroom Beetle, or Shroom Stalk. Now, I say small, but Really, these things are the size of your average real-life dog, but they are pretty harmless creatures in the shape of a beetle with mushrooms on its back, living both in the wilds and as pets all over eastern and northeastern Tamriel, from Skyrim's caverns to Morrowind's ashlands and Blackmarsh's swamps. They are quite abundant in Morrowind, where the local Dunmer often keep them as pets. But the funny thing is that it's been suggested that the creature originally was just native to Blackmarsh, but that the Dunmer took many of them with them to Morrowind to be kept as pets. They then took these creatures from the swamps of Blackmarsh during their raids in which they capture Argonian slaves, with some sources suggesting that these captured Shroom Beetles eventually blossomed into one big Morrowind-wide population after some released them into the wilds in Morrowind, with some of them making their way all the way to the caves of Skyrim through the underground tunnels between Skyrim and Morrowind. There are quite a few different variants of Shroom Beetle to be found across Tamriel, with by far the most common one being the red ruby cap Shroom Beetle, but a blue cap and gold cap Shroom Beetle also existing, with especially the gold cap being a popular pet with the rich. Now, my personal favorite variant of these is the luminescent Shroom Beetle, a Shroom Beetle with light emitting mushrooms on its back found in deep caverns. And another personal favorite is the blue cap Shroom Beetle, which apparently releases relaxing spores inside your house, so it's just kind of a drug pet, which is kind of funny. Alright, next up let's talk about the Thunderbug. The Thunderbug is another large type of beetle, even larger than the Shroom Beetle, being 2 or 3 times their size. They are specifically known for their bright yellow carapaces and unique connection to electric elemental energy. Thunderbugs possess powerful electric abilities that they use for both defense of their eggs and their nests and offense against their prey. Interestingly, Thunderbugs often gather in packs, feeding off each other's elemental energy to kind of recharge and strengthen themselves, and their connection to electricity also enables them to perform various elemental attacks on their prey, which makes them even more dangerous in groups. Their life cycle is largely unknown, but it's known that they start out laying eggs in places with a soft surface, after which from the eggs, young Thunderbugs hatch as maggots, which then grow into adult Thunderbugs. Now, their name is derived from their sharp bite, which shocks a person with a jolt of electricity whenever they attack someone. In addition, Thunderbugs have some surprising uses. Their eggs, for example, are said to taste rather sweet, and eating them creates a tingling sensation due to a small amount of electricity that's within the egg. Additionally, like many other bugs that we've talked about in this video so far, parts of their bodies are sometimes harvested and used in crafting and consumption. For example, their youngest maggot form is often harvested by the Bosmer in the making of their disgusting Rothmeth alcoholic beverage. Cool, I guess. Now, the next creature that we'll talk about is another large beetle, the Shalk. The Shalk lacks the Thunderbug's electrical powers. Instead, Shalks are known for their ability to spit fire, making them quite dangerous in their own right. They are native to the ashlands of Morrowind, specifically close to those places where the lava is closest to the surface and temperature is warmest. They tend to congregate together near lava flows, gathering in packs, although they can also be found deep underground in Morrowind's caverns. Various versions of the Shalk exist, ranging in size and color. Some are smaller, while others, particularly those seen in the Elder Scrolls Online, are much larger. The different variants mostly set themselves apart by having different patterns on their carapaces, such as the orange and yellow variant, which is most seen on the surface of Vardenfell, and the ash-grey colored Ash-Eater Beetle, which is a version of Shalk which buries itself in ash-covered surfaces. And then there's the black-shelled Fiery Shalk, which we see in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Now, Shalks are a pretty sizable cog in Morrowind's ecosystem and economy, as they are herded for their meat, with their carapaces used in crafting and their resin harvests to make glue. Just like many others, their body parts have a diverse range of applications that the people of Morrowind use, from furniture making to medicine production to, like I said, glue. Now, the final type of gigantic beetle that we're going to talk about is the so-called Assassin Beetle. The Assassin Beetle, which again is similar in size to both the Thunderbugs and the Shalks, is another hostile large beetle. However, this large black and red beetle was originally from Yokuda. These beetles evolved from the smaller Samara beetles of Yokuda, which were once kept as pets by the Ragada and taken to Tamriel during their invasions. However, upon being brought to Tamriel, they found the environment so suitable that they eventually grew significantly larger and more dangerous, eventually outgrowing their pet status and becoming one of Hammerfell's natural predators, as they became too big to keep as pets and were released into the wilds by the early Redguards. In the wild, they developed aggressive tendencies, and their aggressive behavior makes them a threat to other creatures, forming a danger to both animals and mortal travelers. Now, the growing of the Samara beetles into the assassin beetles has some religious connotations, with some Redguards believing it is a hard lesson from the gods and not to fall for the hunger of sap or to greed. But how true that is, we don't know. Now, in general, assassin beetles are known for their stealthy nature, that's why they're called assassin beetles, because they often cloak themselves in shadows, becoming nearly invisible, and then strike their prey from behind, like an assassin. Now, while they mostly live in the deserts and savannas of Hammerfell, they have also migrated into jungles and other warm climates around Tamriel, as they adapted to a variety of environments and spread out across the continent. Now, before we move on to the next kind of creature, I want to quickly mention another type of beetle, this time far smaller, the Scarab. Scarab beetles, while not wildly different from the Scarab beetles in our own world, are culturally significant to many peoples across Tamriel, from the Redguards, who have a knightly order of the Scarab, to the Dunmer. So significant in fact they are to the Dunmer that House Redoran put the Scarab on their house banner. In addition, both in the lessons of Vivek and in the teachings of Mankar Cameron's Mythic Dawn, Lorcan, the missing gold, is referred to as the Scarab, which is pretty interesting. However, despite this cultural significance, the little critters themselves don't really seem to differ greatly from their real-world counterparts. So, I guess we can move on. Alright, so next up is a creature that we've only ever seen in Skyrim a few times, the so-called Shellbug. The Shellbug is a pretty mysterious and fascinating creature, primarily known for its hard, durable carapace, which is highly valued by the Falmer for crafting armor. These large insects are bred deep underground by the Falmer for the purpose of harvesting their carapaces. Interestingly, Shellbugs are not aggressive and they either move very slowly or completely immobile, raising questions about how they might survive in the wild if left on their own. To harvest their tough carapace, a pickaxe or other type of hard equipment is required, as their shell is incredibly sturdy and hard, and when their carapaces are completely mined out, they die. Now, despite this unique piece of lore, we know very little about the Shellbug, and I honestly wish that we knew more about them. If I had to do any speculation, I'd say that they might be related somehow to the Chaurus, but that's just going off their creature design, but we don't really know much more about them in the lore, unfortunately. Anyway, next up, let's talk about the Fetcherfly. Fetcherflies are small fly-like creatures native to Vvardenfell and some parts of elsewhere, with a black body and reddish-orange wings. These fly-like insects generate a small amount of heat in their body, making a single Fetcherfly warm to the touch, but when gathered in swarms they become far more dangerous, as the heat that they produce in a swarm becomes far more intense and far more dangerous. A large colony of Fetcherflies can create enough warmth to cause their nests to glow from the heat and permanently emit smoke. While a lone Fetcherfly isn't that much of a threat, their swarms are quite dangerous, and they luckily mostly only attack when they feel threatened and will not pursue anyone if they believe that the danger has passed, usually leaving travelers alone once they created far enough distance between the traveler and the nest that they felt were being threatened. Most Fetcherfly colonies are led by a queen, and that queen has a very interesting ability, because the queen has the ability to tap into magma sources, as they're called, and transform their nest into a mighty hive golem. This is honestly really cool, and this ability makes them by far one of my favorite insects on this list. Now, this transformation into a hive golem helps the colony relocate the nest, but it can also be used for combat to defend the colony if the queen feels threatened, and that is really cool. Now, next up is another Morrowind native that I would like to talk about. You will notice a trend that a lot of these interesting insects are all from Morrowind, and it's the so-called Ashhopper. Ashhoppers are small insects that thrive in volcanic environments. Most commonly, they're found in Vvardenfell and in southern Solstheim and other volcanic places. In Morrowind, these creatures are considered low-maintenance pets by the Dark Elves. However, the Ashhoppers of Solstheim are actually quite different. They are far bigger in size and they are far more aggressive and hostile, often attacking travelers who venture too close to them. Now, some have speculated that the large Ashhoppers that we see in 4th era Solstheim are evolutions of the small Ashhoppers that we see 1,000 years earlier in the 2nd era. But to be completely honest with you, we don't exactly know what their relation to each other is. They could also be simply two different subspecies, as 1,000 years usually isn't enough time for such a dramatic evolutionary change, but it's possible. Now, next up, let's talk about moths. Tamriel has quite a large variety of moths, each with their own unique lore and cultural significance. Now, by far the most well-known type of moth is the Ancestor moth, which is also perhaps the most renowned and revered moth of the bunch. Native to Cyrodiil and specific microclimates around Tamriel known as Ancestor Glades, these sacred gypsy moth-like creatures are deeply intertwined with Cyrodiilic traditions. The cult of the Ancestor Moth, which I talked about before on this channel in my video about Moth Priests, venerates these moths, believing that they carry the spirits of ancestors, preserving their wisdom for future generations. And through specific sacred rituals with these moths, the Order can attempt to read the Elder Scrolls, something which is otherwise nearly impossible for mortal eyes. The process of reading an Elder Scrolls with the help of Ancestor Moths is mystical, involving a phenomenon called the Song of the Ancestor Moth, which is slow, harmonious sound waves that allow the moths to serve as a sort of conduit through which the scrolls can be interpreted by mortals. It's pretty complicated, and I talk about it in a far greater extent in my video on Moth Priests. But this ability to help with interpreting what's essentially a fragment of creation definitely makes them one of the most interesting insects on this list in my opinion. Now, one additional thing that you need to know about Ancestor Moths is that the silk that they produce, which is known as Ancestor Silk, is highly prized across Cyrodiil and is valued by most nobles for creating really fine garments, and also valued for making strong light armor that also easily holds powerful enchantment. Now, other than Ancestor Moths, there are many other types of moths. You've got a Tamrielic moth for almost every color of the rainbow, from red moths to blue moths to silver-white moths, green moths, yellow moths, purple moths, grey moths and brown moths. None of them have all that much lore, except for 3 variants. One is a so-called Painter's Moth, which is a type of moth with really colorful wings, which is prized by Tamriel's painters, as their colored wings can be used to create a wide variety of paint figments. You've also got the Bright Moon's Lunar Moth, which play a bit of a role in Khajiiti folktales, as they say that being followed by one of these moths means that one is blessed by the moons. And finally, we've got the cool Phoenix Moths, which are moths that permanently burn with fire, and the Druids believe that they are echoes of ancient times, back when magic was wild, and that they themselves, or the Druids, created these moths in ancient times. Whether or not that's true, we don't know, but we do know that they live in volcanic places with historical druid presence, so they might have been created by them. Something interesting is that not everyone on Tamriel seems to agree on how exactly these moths come into the world. Some say that they emerge as adult phoenix moths from volcanic flames, while others say that they start as caterpillars, which are warm to the touch, which one day ignite with fire. And then from the burning coals and ashes from their former body as a caterpillar, the phoenix moth emerges. Sadly, we've never seen any of it happen in the games, so I cannot confirm or deny any of these theories. Alright, so having talked about moths, let's talk about spiders. Officially, not insects, just like some of the other creatures in this video. I know, but it's my channel and I've got time, so let's talk about them. So, spiders, or rather, mostly giant spider variants, are some of the most common enemies encountered across Tamriel. I mean, anyone who has ever played Skyrim has to have encountered a frostbite spider at some point. Now, there's many different variants of spider across Tamriel, however, none of them have all too extensive lore, and all of them basically behave like spiders in our own universe, except big. They are some of Tamriel's apex predators, with especially the really big ones, which can be bigger than 2 humans, going for really big prey, from the intelligent races to large cows, which they catch in their webs and then ensnare in their spider threads. Really interesting, but again, it's kind of behavior like we see in most spiders in our universe. Usually they're encountered in dark, mostly underground places, and if they are in a group, there's usually a leader spider, usually in the form of a queen or brood mother. Most of them have some version of venom or poison to attack with, and almost all of them are permanently in my nightmares, so let's quickly move on. Next up, let's talk about the insectoid species called the Kwama, which can be found in Morrowind. The Kwama are large insectoid creatures native to Morrowind and northern Blackmarsh. They are primarily kept by the Dunmer, who raise them in caves known as Kwama mines. These mines are valuable for the production of Kwama eggs, a nutritious food source, and Kwama meat, both of which are export products for Morrowind. In fact, Kwama mines make up quite a sizable portion of Morrowind's economy, and running a Kwama mine requires considerable skill and organization, as the mines need to be protected from outside interference, and the egg harvesting needs to be done in such a way that the colony inside the mine continues to thrive. In fact, there's a whole Kwama Council of Morrowind, which acts as a sort of guild for Morrowind's Kwama mine operations. It's big and serious business in Morrowind. Now, in the wild and in the mines, Kwama live in a large structured colony, situated in expansive tunnel networks, which they themselves digged. Within these colonies there's a clear hierarchy that determines the role of the different Kwama types. On top we have the Kwama Queen, which is the largest and most vital member of the colony. She produces the eggs that sustain the colony's population and is the most respected member of the colony. However, due to her massive size, she is immobile and generally relies on those lower in the hierarchy to care for her. The queen is difficult to replace, making her one of the most important individuals in the colony, and sometimes a queen dying may mean the end for a Kwama colony altogether, as it may fall apart. So generally, those colonies living in Kwama mines, the colony exploiters who run the mine, really want to keep the queens alive. Now, below the queen in the hierarchy are the Kwama warriors. They are the protectors of the colony, guarding the tunnels from intruders. These aggressive creatures can deliver both poisonous and elemental attacks, and the larger warriors also mate with the queen to ensure the continuation of the colony and, make sure that egg production happens. Now, below the Kwama warriors are the Kwama workers. They're responsible for digging the tunnels that make up the colony's home, and these workers also produce unique pheromones which allow the Kwama to recognize their own territory. Kwama colonies are known to be very territorial, and encounters with other colonies, for example when two colonies dig into each other's tunnels, can often lead to fights, and usually one of the two colonies being driven to extinction because one of the two colonies wins. Which likely also means that the winning colony probably takes the tunnels of the other colony and expands its own colony into the tunnels. Whether or not that happens, we don't know, but it seems logical to me. Anyway, below the workers in the hierarchy and significantly smaller than the workers are the Kwama foragers. The foragers venture above ground out of the colony to search for food and scout new areas for potential expansions of the colony. Though they are aggressive to travelers, they pose little real threat unless provoked. I'll be honest with you, I always found them to be quite annoying while playing Morrowind, but I know that other people quite enjoy them, so I won't bash them too much, but they are little shitworms. Sorry. Anyway, at the very bottom of the hierarchy are the Scribs. Scribs are the larval form of the Kwama emerging from their eggs, and they are generally quite harmless and not aggressive, although they do possess the ability to paralyze their prey if threatened. Eventually these also grow out to all different other types of Kwama, from queens to foragers. Something funny is that there's actually Dunmer children's stories featuring a character called the Brave Little Scrib, which is pretty interesting. I talk about that in my video on the fairy tales and folk tales of Tamriel, which is in the description of the video in case you want to see that after this video. Anyway, the intricate hierarchy and division of labor inside a Kwama colony makes Kwama colonies quite efficient and allows them to thrive beneath Morrowind's ash-filled landscapes. Now, the Kwama seem to draw inspiration from several different types of real-world insects in their behavior, and in my opinion, they are one of the most interesting creatures on this list. In fact, I kinda wish that I'd done a singular video on them before, but I suppose covering them here at least does them some justice. Now, next up, let's talk about the Nix species, because this species is said to be a distant relative of the Kwama. The Nix species consists of the Nix Hound and the Nix Ox, and to make things a bit more complicated, those are actually separate but distantly related species as well. Let's start by talking about the Nix Hound. Now, the Nix Hound is a four-legged insectoid native to Morrowind's Ashlands, which is really where so far we found a lot of Tamriel's most interesting insects, as you probably noticed. Now, the Nix Hound is most often compared to Tamriel's wolves due to their comparable size and behavior. While these creatures primarily target small animals like baby guars and goats, they occasionally also hunt larger prey, including the intelligent races of Tamriel, making it necessary for travelers to watch out for them while traveling the Ashlands, and for Dunmer children not to be let out alone into the wilds, else they may be eaten by Nix Hounds. Now, generally Nix Hounds will organize themselves into packs, much like wolves that they resemble, though they are said to be a bit less intelligent than wolves and dogs. Despite this, their behavior is strikingly similar to dogs, especially in domesticated settings, because they can be domesticated and they are sometimes kept as pets by the Dunmer, as they can be easily domesticated and even show affection towards their owners. Nix Hounds can also be trained as trackers, using their keen sense of smell to find objects. Again, just like dogs. Something interesting is that the Nix Hound, while a predator, isn't really a meat eater. In fact, once they take down their prey, they generally just suck out the blood out of the prey's bodies, leaving behind husks of drained, clean meat, which in turn contributes to Morrowind's ecosystem by providing food for other creatures, which eat these bloodless carcasses. Their need for sustenance, however, is great, and when food is scarce, they may resort to preying upon each other or even feeding on fluid-rich plants, which is pretty interesting, as that means that they are sort of omnivores, as they can survive with both plant fluids and animal fluids. Now, like I said, they share their names with the Nix Ox, which, despite having the first name Nix as well, are wildly different creatures and are basically a different species which is just distantly related. The Nix Ox is a large, six-legged arthropod that looks a bit like a gigantic flea, and they're roughly the size of horses. They've got long, hairy legs that allow these giants to roam the ashlands of Morrowind. Although it may appear intimidating, the Nix Ox is actually primarily a peaceful creature, feeding on fungus, especially large, hardened mushrooms, which it cracks open with its mandibles to reach the softer interiors. They start out as larvae, and over the course of their lives they grow up to become gentle giants, as some Dark Elves call them. Now, the Nix Oxen have been domesticated for centuries by the Ashlander tribes, who use them for various purposes, including using them as war mounts in some cases. There's several different variants of Nix Oxen, each with unique traits. For example, the Fire Moth Nix Ox, which has red-orangish legs, tends to be more aggressive, although they can still be tamed, and especially these aggressive ones are often used as war mounts by skilled riders. There's several different other variants as well, from variants with blue legs to grey legs. Capturing and domesticating wild Nix Oxen is actually a very well established profession in Morrowind. Dedicated breeders raise domesticated herds, while hunting parties venture into the wilderness to capture wild ones. These hunters typically strike at dawn when the Nix Oxen are still asleep, ensuring they're capturing the best specimens of the bunch. To domesticate a wild Nix Oxen, handlers have to use drills to carefully pierce the creature's thick carapace to reach a specific bundle of nerves and organs, where trained professionals can insert hooks to make the creatures docile and obedient. There are some in Tamriel who take offense to this practice, seeing this as hard changing their nature and seeing this as quasi-slavery, but the Dunmer don't really see anything wrong with it, and they don't intend to stop in the foreseeable future. Now, despite being gentle creatures after their domestication, some wild Nix Oxen can be quite aggressive. This behavior makes the profession of Nix Ox taming actually quite dangerous now and then. Nonetheless, the demand for Nix Oxen, whether for work or warfare, has created a thriving market in Morrowind, with breeders and hunters creating an entire industry based on the exploitation of the creatures. Now, before I'll talk about the final creature in this video, an honorable mention to the Flesh Bloats creature and Toe Borers. Both of these creatures are parasites that we know exist in the Elder Scrolls universe, but we don't know anything about them, other than how to repel them. But to be fair, we don't even know if they are insects, and if it wasn't for the legend that is Tarpon Pet who helped with this video, I doubt we would have even found out about them. Or at least I would have probably not found out about them. Cool. Now, the final creature in this video I'm cheating a bit with, as it's the Elytra. A creature which really only exists in the Shivering Isles, so it doesn't really belong in a video on Tamriel's bugs and insects, but it's an interesting creature nonetheless, and it may be months or even years before I do a bug likes and insect likes of Oblivion video, so I decided to cover them anyway. Complain all you want, it's my channel, I'll do what I want. So, Elytras are essentially large mantises, native to the Shivering Isles, Sheogorath's realm, and they are very prized creatures in the Shivering Isles, as if they are either bred or enchanted in a specific way, we don't know exactly how this process works. Their waste, or be it poop or pee, is called Feldew, which is one of the Elder Scrolls universe's most powerful drugs, causing a powerful euphoria. So you probably understand why the inhabitants of the Shivering Isles mostly like these creatures and try to domesticate them when possible, as they can be domesticated quite successfully, and luckily for them, these creatures live all over the Shivering Isles, with two variants, one brightly colored one that lives in the realm of Mania, and one darker one which lives in the realm of Dementia in the Shivering Isles. While they mostly live in the Shivering Isles' tunnel systems, they also appear in smaller numbers on the surface. Now, in addition to all this, the Elytras have powerful venoms which can either kill or paralyze enemies, and then these paralyzed enemies becoming the vessels where they lay their eggs in to hatch their young. While inside the body, the young Elytra feeds on the body after it's hatched, eventually killing the host, after which the young Elytra hatches from the body. Disgusting, but pretty cool. And that was my long video on Tamriel's bugs and insects. Did I talk about everything? Probably not, but by Maroon's Dagon Scrotum, this video was far more work than I ever anticipated it to be. And it was delayed after getting delayed, and I feel like now it's as complete as it was ever going to be. So do me a solid, and if you want, give the video a like, as that's how YouTube decides whether or not my content is worthy in this world. And of course, give some love to Tarpon Pet, link in the description. Really, without his help and expertise, I would have never found some of the most obscure creatures on this list, and some of the lore would have been incomplete. So, I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and even though it's not a long lore collection, it's still a really long video, so I do wonder if anyone made it to the end, and if you did, then let me know in the comments what your favorite type of clothing is. Not only would it be super random and confuse people who never made it to the end, it might also give me some new ideas for clothing, or in the case of the ladies, it might give me some ideas, which I can pitch to my girlfriend, which she might like, so let me know. That being said, all there's left for me to do is to vocally thank my top Patreon supporters. Mr. Bernardo Binda, His Soul, Gabriel Binda, Doji, K-Legend M, King Chris, Lance Vandertooth, Volkure of Argonia, RP the Beast, Devin Mattingly, Rakai, and Sword of Bushido. They and all the others on screen make my videos possible, and for that I am very grateful. That said, I'll see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls Lore video. Probably next week. Bye bye.